Hi there, everyone. My name is Just Stop, and about 6 months ago, you may have seen that after multiple years of just saying no and staying away from the subject as a cartoon reviewer, I finally decided to cave into peer pressure and made my obligatory SpongeBob SquarePants is Dead video about saving Bikini Bottom the Sandy Cheeks movie. Now, this wasn't a decision that I made lightly. I mean, after all, you only have a first time like that every once a career, and I was pretty certain that was going to be both the start and end of me talking about SpongeBob pretty much ever, but well, unfortunately, guys, I'm sorry to say, I've gotten hooked on the topic again, because the new Plankton movie that just dropped on Netflix is surprisingly good. Like, okay, I'm not taking back any of what I said back then. I still wholeheartedly believe every single thing I said from my last video, but goddamn, I was not expecting it to go hard like that. They really found a way to make the best SpongeBob media in years right after giving us the worst of all time. I feel like that was almost intentionally done to mess with me after making my big definitive statement about the franchise, but hey, at the same time, good SpongeBob content is good SpongeBob content. I'm not gonna complain about the crew learning from their mistakes and getting off the slop train to finally make something fun. And man, it really does feel like this was made not just to honor Plankton as a character, but to give the biggest fucking Yakuza-level apology for the Sandy movie that they possibly could. Like, if they were gonna try to come back from that and actually regain some level of interest in the future of SpongeBob, this was precisely the way to do it, since it is almost nothing but learning from their mistakes and essentially looking at every single thing the Sandy movie did to say, okay, but what if we did this, except it wasn't terrible this time? In fact, it does such a good job at outdoing that film on every conceivable level, I could just structure this video like my last one, but make it a positive comparison if I wanted to. And so that's what I'm gonna do. Part 1. It gives the characters greater depth, instead of flanderizing them. Alright, so one of the big things I hated about the Sandy movie is that it's a peak example of how simplifying characters down to a few specific hyper traits can make them both incredibly dull and uninteresting. At the start of the show, Sandy was a chill but logical, sweet but stern fish out of water type who loved bodybuilding, karate, extreme sports, science, and had a fondness for her home state of Texas. Sounds like a character you'd have plenty of room to build a movie around, right? Right. And there are multiple seasons worth of episodes showing that she can work well at the center of a narrative. Episodes like Pressure, Pre-Hibernation Week, Sandy, SpongeBob, and the Bullworm. Stories that perfectly showcase who she is as a character by making scenarios that draw out her personality. Except that we don't see any of that in the actual Sandy movie, since by then, she'd been reduced to just a generic scientist who likes Texas. So everything about who she is and what she has to go through is condensed within those two specific interests. She has to go to Texas after her old science lab steals Bikini Bottom, she has to work together with her weird Texan family, the antagonist is an evil marine biologist, but none of it does anything to draw out Sandy's personality or give her depth, so in the end, she's just a really boring, lame protagonist who's a pale imitation of herself. And look, I'm aware that her becoming this way was the fault of the show, not the movie, but even so, a film centered around exploring who a character is should be about taking their known traits and giving them depth the show could never convey, not just reinforcing them like there's nothing else that could be explored. I mean, would you like the SpongeBob movie if it was just 90 minutes of him being childish with no greater arc or lesson at the end of it? Yeah, I didn't think so. Although then again, that's probably not a great comparison, seeing as at least the example I provided had to do with a personality trait. The Sandy movie doesn't even have that, since ironically, she's just so fucking undefined these days. An issue the Plankton movie thankfully doesn't have at all because unlike Sandy, or almost anyone else in the modern cast for that matter, Plankton's never really been flanderized thanks to the fact that he's always been so effectively simple. You ask me to describe classic Sandy in detail, I can write an essay. You ask me to describe Plankton at any time in the show, past or present, I can do it in a sentence. He's a pathetically small, failed restaurateur slash self-proclaimed evil genius who's obsessed with stealing the Krabby Patty secret formula through convoluted plans he almost never learns from. He's not a complex character by any stretch of the imagination, but that's not required for you to like him or find him entertaining. In fact, he kind of even rejects nuance in the sense that anytime he's given the chance to learn a lesson, he actively chooses not to purely for the reason that being evil is more fun. Hell, as far as recurring characters are concerned, let alone main ones, he's probably the most straightforward of the cast aside from Fred, the guy whose whole thing is just that he screams, "My leg!" And I think it's for that reason that he's been able to stay consistent consistent while everyone else has gotten worse. It's just always been really hard to fuck him up. There was never a chance to ruin Plankton because he's had the same shtick for the past 25 years. He's been nearly unchanged ever since he was introduced at the start of episode 6. And that's why he's the perfect choice for the lead of his own movie. Like, you might assume a guy who's never changed would be hard to write a compelling journey for, but in reality, it's the opposite, seeing as he's not only got the most potential room to grow through an arc, but he also isn't hard to come up with an arc for, given his traits and flaws are already so well defined. You know, for a character like Sandy, who's lost so much of herself there was barely anything to work with, it was clearly hard to give her an arc that felt in character, so the film just ignores that arc she's supposed to go through for most of the runtime, since it's literally so shallow and basic, it might as well not even be there. Whereas with Plankton, it's very different because his whole identity is based around one gigantic flaw. He never knows when to quit and move on. His whole life is centered around wanting the secret formula to reach world domination no matter what. It's the only thing he seems to care about, excluding his computer wife Karen, and even then he tends to focus on the formula more. So boom, there's his arc for the movie. He finally drives Karen off with his selfish tunnel vision and has to self-reflect for once to understand why it happened. You notice how smooth and effective that is? Yeah, that's what you can accomplish when the character at the center of the whole thing isn't completely undefined and soulless. The Plankton movie doesn't need additional bullshit about having a family of circus freaks or a secret double identity or any of that other convoluted horse hockey, since they didn't have to go that far to find a strong narrative. It's just an exploration of Plankton's character through him looking back on his history to see where he went wrong. And you know what? Honestly, I kinda love it, because while on one hand exploring a character through childhood flashbacks is a little played out and cliche, to the point even the show's already done it a couple times, the setup and execution is so naturally fitting that I don't really even mind. After all, what's the best way to give a character who doesn't care about being good a reason to change? Have him hurt the one person he loves. That's a smart decision. And this does really give you the feeling that Plankton loves Karen by the end of it too, seeing how on top of showing us their deeper bond / dynamic over the film's load of flashbacks, Plankton personality-wise is still obviously in character the entire time. He hasn't been toned down from his usual self whatsoever. From the start, it's made very clear to us that he is a villainous, self-centered, egotistical jerk, and he fucking revels in it to the fullest extent. Shit, he's not even capable of feeling empathy until he gets an empathy chip he made for Karen inserted into his skull, and it burns out. That's how evil he is. It's almost exactly like how he was in the early years of the show, and that's precisely what makes his eventual declaration of love for Karen so believable. Since for a maniacal little shit like that to love anything other than himself, even a little bit, it's gotta be a deep kind of love that goes beyond anything else he's ever felt. And what's great about it is that it doesn't contradict his defined character traits either, seeing as he does still neglect Karen. It's just that here we learn he's not doing it on purpose. He's doing it because he's an idiotic supervillain who needs to be taught to understand that he's done wrong and actually hurt her, which, you know, on one level, with how intentionally shallow Plankton is, that's super funny for just how much it takes for him to change, but on another, it also helps to demonstrate just how big it is for him to learn, even if he stays evil after getting the lesson. It's sort of like Megatron deciding he should treat Starscream better in between fighting the Autobots. In the grand scheme of things, they're more or less the same as they always were, but knowing they're able to make that kind of gesture at all goes a long way in showing they're not quite as black and white as we used to think they were. And hey, next to Sandy's quote-unquote arc, it's basically Zuko from Avatar levels of development. There's really no comparison. The gap in writing is astronomical. And the same can be said for the rest of the cast in the way that, oh god, is this an improvement from the Sandy movie in every conceivable way, especially with SpongeBob, who's essentially gone from being an annoying quip-dispensing prop, this cancerous lump of cells that Sandy's forced to carry around like luggage for how fucking useless he is, into being, well, actually SpongeBob. And not the modern, only slightly less flanderized SpongeBob from the modern seasons of the show. No. I'm talking about the version of SpongeBob from seasons 2 to 3 that we hardly get to see in such a natural state anymore. The one who's allowed to act like a functioning person, who gets thoughtful and frustrated and even occasionally angry. The one who comes to conclusions that require a brain. The one who's whimsically childish but not a total moron who's completely blind to reality. Frankly, it's maybe the most accurate version of classic SpongeBob I've seen in film since Sponge Out of Water. And to illustrate how big the contrast between it and the Sandy movie really is, I don't think there's a better example I could give than the way he reacts to Bikini Bottom being taken in both of these films. In the Sandy movie, he makes a quip about streaming services and starts crying uncontrollably to diffuse the tension. Standard fare for what you'd expect from a modern SpongeBob bit. But in the Plankton movie, it's actually given a bit of weight? I mean, don't get me wrong, I wasn't bawling my eyes out or anything, and I'm not saying that's what it should have done to me. I already got that enough from the Shell City scene in the first movie, but I don't know. There's a certain gravitas to the destruction of Bikini Bottom here, and how, as Karen's taking the last of it to form her world-conquering robot, we just pan over it slowly with haunting music, while SpongeBob somberly describes how his life and friendships have been entirely upended right in front of him. He genuinely sounds heartbroken here, and there's not any over-the-top crying or backhanded jokes to break the atmosphere. It's just a legitimate moment where his character gets to feel things like a human, and instead of just moving along as if it doesn't matter, we're then given time to linger on that emotion to help understand what he's feeling. And again, listen, I'm not trying to say that this is high art. I wasn't actively sobbing in my chair screaming, "This is cinema!" at the thought of SpongeBob SquarePants being depressed, but man, that level of emotional maturity he gets to show here in such an unspokenly subtle way is something that just doesn't exist in the version who takes a deep breath of cow shit and savors every second of it, you know? There's a level of respect for the character beyond just the jokes you could tell with him in the scene, and that respect translates over to the rest of the cast as well, in that you could just tell there's a lot more thought put into introducing them in case some of the people watching don't already know. Like, take Mr. Krabs for instance. In the couple minutes we follow him during the Sandy movie, all we really learn about him is that he's kind of a coward. It doesn't really give you much of a profile about who he is as a person. But in the even fewer minutes he's shown in the Plankton movie, we learn that he's grumpy, cynical, paranoid, stingy, morally flexible, pretty much everything he is as a character without being too in your face about it. And keep in mind, this is basically a cameo role. He barely plays a part at all in the overarching story. Yet we understand who he is a million times better than when he was shown in the Sandy movie. The same's true for Patrick, Mrs. Puff, Pearl, fuck, even Sandy. Yeah, Sandy feels more distinctly herself in a literal background role than she does in the movie that's named after her. We are in different goddamn universes of character writing here. And if you want to know who's to blame for that being the case, then look no further than the film's main writer, Mr. Lawrence, who, in case you weren't aware, is not only the voice of Plankton himself, but also the only remaining SpongeBob writer who's been around from the beginning. And when I say from the beginning, I do mean from the beginning. His first writing credit was for the second full episode. He did the introductory segments for not just Plankton, but also Sandy, Mrs. Puff, and Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy. He wrote classics like Hall Monitor, Employee of the Month, SB129, Culture Shock, Graveyard Shift, Imitation Crabs. I could keep going, but my point is, he's an OG who knows his shit and has played an instrumental role in shaping many of these characters. So it makes sense that the writing feels so classic, and that the story takes from several Plankton episodes to be a real celebration of who he is, instead of just a worthless, cheap imitation. Which, alright, speaking of, that too. It uses old episodes as the foundation for a more engaging story, instead of ripping them off. So another thing that made my piss boil about the Sandy movie was how it obviously recycled shit from earlier stories without having anything of note that they could add to make it better. I mean, they tried to glitz it up with all the dumb bullshit I mentioned before, hoping a new wacky coat of paint would distract from how fucking derivative it is, but really, there was no hiding that in the end, it was just a retread of an episode from season 1 that was somehow told less coherently and with less substance despite being quite literally 9 times as long. Now, the reason why they did this isn't hard to figure out. They wanted to make this respectful homage for Sandy that took the roots of that classic episode to tell a story that celebrated her character while exploring those traits a little deeper. It's just that they couldn't think of any meaningful additions, and the character was a shell of her former self, so all they could do to go deeper was essentially to look at her and say, "Okay guys, you know how she's from Texas? Let's make her even more from Texas." They just clearly had no idea how to make Sandy deeper without digging her deeper into the hole that modern SpongeBob put her in. But hey, on the positive, doing a film that honors a character by taking one of their defining episodes and expanding it for more depth sounds like a great idea. If only there were a movie that did that. Oh yo, what's good, Plankton movie? Yeah, big surprise at this point, I know, but this movie really is the genuine love letter to a character the Sandy movie was so desperately trying to be, and a big part of that includes going for the same bit of expanding on an older episode that represents them well, except this time they actually expanded on it. And they also chose a super interesting episode to serve as the basis too, with how it's not from any of the obvious choices like fun, or the algae's always greener, or even something from the golden age of the show whatsoever, but instead an episode from near the end of season 6, which is like pretty much the dead center of the SpongeBob Dark Ages. Nobody likes to talk about those seasons or their content, so you'd think it would probably be off limits to serve as the inspiration for a movie, but it honestly works a lot here thanks to the specific episode they chose to go with, that being Single Cell Anniversary, where Plankton has to prove he cares about Karen by getting her a gift for their anniversary. Okay, I know that doesn't sound like it's the best choice as the basis for a Plankton movie. After all, why go for something so mundane when you've got episodes that are infinitely more iconic and well remembered? But there is something about Single Cell Anniversary that sets it apart from those earlier classics. Something that only someone who really understands Plankton's character and evolution would get as crucial to a film centered around him: his romantic relationship with Karen. Just think about it. When you look at Plankton's episodes over the years, what's the one thing about him that changes? Karen. In Plankton's first episode, she doesn't even have a name. She's just a random computer monitor with a voice. But then in her next appearance, it's established she's the one who gives him most of his ideas. Then later on in season 3, we learn that she's his wife, then she gets a name, then she develops her snarky personality, and it just keeps going and going like that with each new appearance until, in Single Cell Anniversary, they have a full-blown nagging couple relationship to be explored. And this wasn't an unintentional thing either. It was very much a deliberate push to give Plankton something more after his first appearance. And just like the character writing of this movie, you can hand all the credit for that over to Mr. Lawrence, who, oh yeah, I almost forgot to mention, is pretty much the reason he exists like he does today. Of course, Steven Hillenburg created the character before anything else, but at the time he originally showed up back in episode 6, there wasn't much of a plan for using him outside of another story or two. Like, you want to know why Plankton has maybe the simplest premise out of any character in the main SpongeBob cast? It's cause he was the only one who was originally meant as a total one-off. He was designed to work for a couple episodes and then never show up again in any significant way. It's how Mr. Lawrence got to play him in the first place. He was originally supposed to just voice little bit parts like Larry the Lobster or Fred the My Leg Guy, but he got an attachment to Plankton and thus convinced Steve to make him the main antagonist, so from that point on, Plankton, and by extension Karen, were more or less his babies that he spent the next several years on developing. It was him that created their relationship as it is, so it would only make sense that when offered the chance to give Plankton extra depth, he'd build it from the base of an episode about that relationship. It wouldn't have worked to base the movie on one of the classic episodes, since at the time, the two's back and forth was only barely starting out. He needed to pick something from later on to get what he wanted, and the episode he chose works really well, not just because it fulfills that purpose, but also because it, 1, shows how much more efficient Karen is at being evil, and 2, it demonstrates how set in his ways Plankton is, not thinking of basically anyone but himself, which in the film serves as the start of his arc about, for once, not repeating the same endless cycle he always does. You look at most Plankton episodes, what's the formula? It goes, Plankton either gets an idea or Karen gives it to him, he tries to steal the formula in some convoluted way, it goes wrong either through his own short-sightedness or SpongeBob's antics, he yells at Karen for his plan not working, he proceeds to not learn anything and try again next time. It's a thing the show stuck to for almost 15 seasons plus 2 other movies, and it's worked the whole time thanks to them shaking things up to keep the thing entertaining, but looking at it seriously from a character perspective, you could read it more tragically as Plankton being so unwilling to change, he can't help but make the same mistakes over and over without any room for deviation. And so that's what the film runs with to kick off his character arc. One of the parts of his cycle is not appreciating Karen for all the work that she puts in. So after she's had enough and removes her empathy chip to take over the world without him, the rest of the cast are forced to do all they can to get him to change before it's too late. Something that's just such a fun thing to watch play out with all the new little ways it explores their characters like they've never been shown before. I love how with her chip gone, Karen splits into 3 main personality traits as separate personas. I love how Plankton cares more about getting back to the status quo since he hasn't learned empathy yet but misses him and Karen getting along. I love how Karen's gal pals from the later seasons are here as emotional support. I love how one of his first recurring lines, "I went to college," gets repurposed so we can actually see him at college. I love how there's this emphasis on people calling Plankton a jerk, which may or may not be a reference to the 95 Pitch Bible, where at the end of his page, the last sentence says Plankton is a jerk. It's just so many little details like that that show how much love and care went into making this story a real in-depth look at both these characters and their relationship. And maybe the best part about it all is that they never rely on your previous knowledge of the cast or setting for you to care. Now, if you're a hyper-obsessed nerd like me, you can appreciate all the work that goes into giving lip service, like I just got done explaining, but as opposed to the Sandy movie, where your investment in the film is almost entirely based on already liking a cast that it's barely established, here it keeps things centered on just a couple characters that it builds up well over the course of the story. We learn about Karen and Plankton's relationship before it's broken, about SpongeBob's caring nature before he helps, about how important the gal pals are to Karen before they get involved. There's never a moment where if you hadn't heard of SpongeBob before, you'd be wondering to yourself, who are these people and why do I give a shit? It's laid out well like a movie should be, and I know that sounds obvious given this is a movie and all, but you've gotta remember the thing I'm comparing it to, okay? Plus, it does genuinely do a good job investing you in its plot, especially with all the unique styles it goes through in the process. You know, with the Sandy movie, there's no denying it looks better than this on a purely technical quality level, or at least most of the time. But what the Plankton movie lacks in budget, it more than makes up for in experimentation, specifically during the musical numbers, since, oh yeah, this thing is a musical, where they really play around with the aesthetics for a couple fun deviations. Plankton's childhood is Fleischer-inspired, Karen's song gets to be cel-shaded, the sequence of Plankton finally learning empathy has this great, modern psychedelic style. Just all in all, it's probably the most visually interesting SpongeBob film aside from Sponge Out of Water, and considering that was made on a theatrical level budget, I think that says a lot about the crew's passion for making this a good watch that captured that old SpongeBob spirit in its presentation. I will admit the actual songs these sequences go to aren't too memorable, excluding Karen's song, which I'm pretty sure is gonna be stuck in my head for the next couple weeks bare minimum, but hey, I still appreciate the effort, and it does give the film a certain flavor to it that none of the other SpongeBob movies have really ever had. Plus, it doesn't feel the need to shove a funny face down your throat every 6 fucking seconds, so unlike the Sandy movie, I can actually enjoy the visuals for once, instead of looking away out of pure annoyance. And that reminds me. Part 3. The comedy isn't the death of good writing. Okay, so originally I was thinking of putting in a section here to explain why the comedy in this is decent while the Sandy movies is a pile of shit, but I kind of already said everything I wanted to say in my Sandy video. I mean, just take all the things I apply to Golden Age SpongeBob there and put them here, simple as. It relies on fun character interactions with simple setups, they barely do any reference jokes or annoying quips, the cast isn't reduced to one-note caricatures with the same joke repeated till the end of time. It's good. I just don't have much to say that I haven't said already. Maybe copying the structure wasn't as great an idea as I originally thought. Part 4. It's over. As in, the video. This is the same joke as before. To say that this movie surprised me would be the understatement of the goddamn century. And for once and forever with SpongeBob, I'm happy to tell you I sincerely mean that in the most positive way that I can think of. Granted, I wouldn't quite call it amazing. I mostly just think it's a nice, light throwback that respects SpongeBob while giving one of its best characters a fitting send-up, but to repeat myself again if I wasn't being clear enough already, that's the best thing this franchise has done in literal fucking years. These days, to me, a solid 7.5 out of 10 from a piece of SpongeBob media, especially one that came out right after the Sandy movie, might as well be an 11 or 12. I have been suffering in these streets for too long, man. I needed a pick-me-up after just getting smacked in the face over and over again by this franchise, and the Plankton movie was just the reprieve that I was looking for. Now, do I think it's gonna resurrect the franchise from the state of death the Sandy movie put it in? Not even a little bit. Honestly, if anything, I'm more inclined to think this was just a fluke thanks to Mr. Lawrence that's gonna go away the second they take him off the writing team in favor of someone else. I don't expect this phenomenon to happen again anytime soon. But that doesn't mean I wouldn't want it to, since God knows, with a series like this, it could use all the wins that it can get. With that being said, I've been Just Stop, you've been to college, so have a fun time with that student loan debt, and thanks for watching.